We are here to answer your questions about classic minis, about life, about anything. I think we're going to have a really good time tonight.
I always try and say, don't I, that my channel is about getting rid of the black art of working on minis.
For me, getting into minis, it was I had a newer mini. 2007 was one of the BMW minis. It was a Cooper S, and I found out about classics. I'm like, you know what? That's what I want. That's what I want.
There you are now. Hello, everybody.
Amazing.
How did I get into minis? It's something that just kind of happened from just one really good friend of mine asked me to build them, and I said, yeah, I'm doing nothing this weekend. I'll do that.
Man, it's funny how quickly things can change.
It's awesome to have so much really good fun chat with you all. And
yep, that's the best part. I'd really like to make this a regular thing.
Thank you to everybody again, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone, and you know the drill. Enjoy those minis.
See you guys on the next one.
Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing well tonight. Hopefully we're coming in loud and clear. How are you doing this evening, afternoon, or morning, whatever time it is where you are? Mr. Alex Hart would say.
Yes, I think we're enjoying the sunny, hot evening here in Ireland. Wow, have we had a warm week? Woo!
Yeah? What's it been like over there? What's warm for you?
12 degrees, Jesus, it was unbelievable.
Oh, you guys.
It's been like, I think since this day last week, it has continually been sort of 25, 27 degrees, which for us is...
It's pretty hot.
It's unbelievably hot. For the wonderful US viewers, I've no idea what that is in freedom height. It's probably 3,000 or something like that.
Yeah, it's up there. It's up there. Let's see, 27. I think that puts it in the 80s. I think. I don't know. My temperature converter is a little askew.
It's a little off today, isn't it? Yeah. Inches to millimeters we can do, but no one can figure out Fahrenheit. Even you guys.
Yeah, it's tough work. Zero's not zero.
I just would love to be at the high school. Well, I suppose I don't know. It's not gonna be high school. It's gonna be junior school. But the baby infant children being taught temperature. So is ice zero? No. Right. Is water zero? No. Is boiling water 100? No.
Yeah. Poor US kids, they end up... We learn Fahrenheit, then sometimes they teach us Celsius, and then if you're into the sciences, you get Kelvin as well. So you got three different scales.
Why not?
And and then of course the imperial measurements, but we still get taught metric measurements. It's lunacy. It's lunacy.
This is what the rest of the world uses.
You can too, just don't tell anybody.
Don't tell anybody. Yeah. We stuck with a thing, and we're too far down this road now.
We've come too far. The sunken cost fallacy. Yeah. I will say though, I have been trying / experimenting with using only the metric system in my shop, and it's actually been really nice. It's like, divisible by 10. This is a novel idea. Wow.
Everything just seems so straightforward.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes, and ice is a point where we'll start with. Water. This is. It's like the metric system, versus feet and inches and decimality. Like when the people who design it stop using it, that should be an indication to everybody else.
Yep.
To move on.
Well, there's one measurement that I still can't wrap my head around, and I think it's used in the UK. I don't know where else it's used, but the concept of stone for weight. This is like really... Do you? It's super confusing to me. It's like, is it a small stone or is it a big stone? Like,
you've got to figure out the guy who came up with it, don't you? This is a stone.
This right here. This is it. Yeah. Everybody, look at it.
I have one though, and it looks like it's not the same.
Yeah, anyway, it's more like a boulder.
Oh, there you go. Stream is happening, huh? Yeah. Okay, I suppose we should say hi to a few of the people. Hello, Drew.
Yeah.
Good to see you in
Drew,
here.
hello.
Team Valley Lock Classic. Yeah, good to see you all.
Classic Got a few folks in here tonight.
Wow, yeah, it's ticking away there.
Awesome. Well, we have some really, really exciting stuff today. This is one of those topics that I'm sure you're in the same boat as me, but we get lots and lots of questions about A-Series performance. How do I make a 998 faster? How do I make a 1275 faster? Which carb do I use? What do I bolt on? Do I need to rebuild my engine? All questions. And I think what we're hoping to do tonight is to kind of demystify, as Paul would probably call it, demystifying some of the confusing aspects, or maybe what is worth upgrading, what maybe isn't worth upgrading, what do you need, what don't you need. I think that you guys are going to find a lot of awesome information tonight. So got a lot in store.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I get these questions literally all the time. People asking me, right from the very start of what can I literally bolt on to make this go quicker, all the way through to, how are we going to build the quickest engine that we can build? And, everything that's in between that, I suppose, too, about whether it's going to be drivable or it's actually going to make a noticeable difference that you'll feel, or, and at the end of the day, I think all of this has to bring you back to exactly that. What is going to make your Mini nicer to drive, and what is that for you? It is faster acceleration? Is it better top speed? Or is it just that sensation of the car moving better? And I suppose that's what we need to.
That's a great point. I mean, it's all so relative. What means, what a great driving Mini means to me could be completely different from, my closest friend who has another Mini that wants, a full out race car. I want, out of my car, I want a really fast road drivable car that's comfortable to drive, but, has that kind of sleeper feel. And, other folks who might be doing big performance modifications want straight cut gears, don't care if it's louder than, the Mustang that's driving by my house every day and all that stuff. So,
yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Hello, Turbo Phil. I just see he popped in there.
Oh yeah, hey Phil.
To have you on the stream. Good to see you guys here. And a few other regulars that I see. Paul Robinson. Hello, Paul. I think you might have been first to comment, maybe.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
But so, why don't I kick this off with a question that I think both of us should probably answer. And what is your favorite first power modification for a classic Mini? And with maybe bring us through what the goal of that power modification might be for you.
Okay. I suppose this has two parts to it for me, and that would totally depend on the motor I was bolting it to. And I think it's really fair to just talk about 998s and 1275s, being that they were the single most commonly produced engine in Mini terms. We know that there's loads of other variants, and I suppose in fairness, the 1098 was a popular engine, but I think the two most common that seems to be in everybody's car seems to be a 998 or a 1275, and then all the variants outside of that. But given, we'll call them big bore and small bore. So I suppose start with the small bore. I, without a shadow of a doubt, can say that the single greatest improvement that can be bolted onto a small bore 998, in my opinion personally, is the stage 1 kit. I really do think that bang for buck and accessibility, they're the sort of, that would be my criteria for for what it is. I think you see the single biggest improvement, not necessarily in horsepower, but drivability and torque. And as I said, I would get to that from the point of view that really and truly, you don't necessarily need to go and get, it dyno tuned. There's been so much work in there. Okay, would you benefit from it? Yes, you would, but a reasonably amateur mechanic would manage to bolt a stage 1 kit onto a 998 and get it
maybe
up and
let me interrupt you here real quick. For a stage 1 kit, could you kind of outline what that is for the folks that maybe don't know what a stage 1 is?
Totally. So a stage 1 kit, as sold by pretty much all the major mini suppliers, would be an inlet and an exhaust manifold that allows you to delete the sort of factory original cast one-piece item, which in small bore or large bore, to be honest with you, was massively restrictive, and very definitely had a huge effect on the torque produced. So I suppose that certainly would be one of the major components of the kit. They normally give you a needle for the carburetor to help you get the fueling a little bit better, and obviously you can move on with a full exhaust system like something like the RC40. In that kit, they're giving you an inlet manifold, which is a sort of a cast aluminium setup that can be heated or non-heated, I suppose. And it is that sort of combination of those three things with the right needle that seems to certainly, opens up very definitely a 998. I've seen in pretty much any 998 that I've ever been involved in fitting one of those two, I've seen the biggest single improvement in drivability and overall spread of performance, like from low revs all the way through to whatever it'll do.
Because you're basically increasing that ability to take in the air fuel mixture more easily, so you get that benefit across the whole band essentially.
And you're reducing this heating effect that the cast iron manifold has done. Having that one-piece cast iron manifold, within moments you've got this massive heat sink of the exhaust into the inlet, and the minute you heat the inlet charge, you immediately reduce the quantity that you can get in there, because you reduce your air density, and and you immediately are going to lose massive quantities of torque effectively. But it was like that for a reason. In fairness, it was emissions controls and economy. That's what they were interested in. So that makes sense. Yeah. But performance upgrade, stage 1 kit. And to be honest with you, onto a 1275, I'd be inclined to say it's equal across the board really on those two. The biggest single improvement is that. Now 1275s tend to be more sensitive to anything on the inlet side, because they're already starting to become starved of air. 998's not so much, even though the cylinder head itself is not a brilliant cylinder head, the standard item, but they're still not quite as starved of air, or as on that progression to starved of air as a 1275 is, early doors, straight out of the box.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, and I think that I probably would resonate that the stage 1 kits, as described just a moment ago, provide you so much. And one thing that I would say for a 998, I would feel similarly. I think just opening up the inlet, the core of the stage 1 kits basically is opening up that inlet and exhaust. So some of these stage 1 kits, I think, come with that with an LCB with them, or some sort of higher flowing downpipes, which allows that exhaust to escape more quickly. And the extension of a performance exhaust. The stock mini exhaust system was very tiny. I mean, it was just like a little pewter exhaust pipe. And opening that up, not only do you get better sound for those of you who care about how your car sounds, but you do get that additional power benefit. So I think that I would probably agree almost entirely with your perspective, Paul, and then compounding on that, kind of decide on what kind of exhaust you want. So like I personally prefer twin box systems. I don't like a loud car,
I
but
agree.
that's not to say that the single box or straight pipe exhaust systems are bad. It's just different strokes for different folks, you know. And I definitely prefer a quieter car. And so, that's probably the first thing I would do. Trying to think if there's anything else that is like just immediately groundbreaking. I wouldn't even replace the distributor if it's working properly, to be honest. Because that opens up its whole additional can of worms of retiming the car, finding the curve that works for your setup, and it's not like impossible or anything, but it's definitely a task that is
I think you're exactly on it. Yeah, I think the stage 1 kit is the sort of ultimate everybody who has a very basic toolkit and watches some of the videos that the likes of yourself or myself put out and gets an understanding for the sort of physics of the thing, are going to manage it. And maybe that's something that we should do in time as well, as maybe we should actually look at collaborating on making how to properly put a stage 1 kit in your mini video from start to finish. I'm sure there is one. I'd say we will find one, but it might well be no harm whatsoever to put something of that caliber out there in a very kind of linear process. But yeah, I do think you're exactly right. I think the minute we move from where we are here at stage 1, we're immediately moving into a world where the modifications you're going to make are now becoming much more physical to the engine, are definitely going to result in, I suppose, like you said, the requirement for maybe a timing light and the understanding of how to time the motor. But believe it or not, you can actually not have any understanding of that and still manage to get a stage 1 kit on and to work. It might benefit from a little more ignition, for sure. But even if you don't do that, it'll still improve the performance overall. And I completely agree. Replacing the exhaust system for a freer flowing system, even if it is twin box, it won't be really any louder. It might sound a little fruitier, all right, but it won't be any louder. But it will completely bring up the torque in the motor massively. And well, massively, it might be an exaggeration, but it'll increase it.
And that piece around the torque of the mini engines, this is something that, maybe coming from a modern car where everybody's like, well, the stage 1, stage 2, stage 45 ECU tune that you can get for, a Volkswagen Golf or something like that. Everybody's got this heavy focus on the horsepower that you're gaining out of it. But when you're getting into mini power modifications, one of the biggest things is kind of reframing your mind around that torque number, because what makes minis fun, from at least my opinion, is lots of torque. That's what makes the car feel fast. Whether it is fast, it's up for debate, but having that additional torque is what kind of puts you in your seat. It gives you that feeling of fastness. And so if you can amplify that, that is how you're going to get, kind of that more tangible feeling of performance increase.
Totally. Something that came into my mind when you suggested this topic, actually, at I think the beginning of last week, or whenever we were saying we kind of finally decided that this was our topic for this stream. There's a lot of snake oil, I think is the term I was trying to think of, out there. Yes, and this is across the board. This is not a mini thing. This is just out there across the board. Snake oil that isn't necessarily portrayed just by the people selling stuff. It's also by the mini community or by the car modifiers community, because I think they want to make themselves or justify their own purchases, I think, maybe a little bit, or the sensation of it. I'm at the risk of literally jumping the gun. I'm going to just bring the old twin SUs in here and say,
Beautiful.
if there was ever a snake oil sort of selling characteristic that I've heard in the past, it's fit a set of twin carburetors to your Mini and it'll drastically improve the performance. Well, the truth is, if your Mini is starved of air and the carburetor that is currently feeding it cannot give it the air that it requires, then absolutely giving it more air will open the motor up. But, if you know that, then you'll already know whether you need a set of twin SUs or not. That to understand that and to have a measure for what your motor actually might want is such a much deeper level of understanding, that this notion that you're just going to fit a set of twin SUs, and if that actually sounds right to you, then I would urge you very strongly to go back to the drawing board and be really absolutely sure that that's what you're doing. Because if you're doing it because someone said to you it's going to go quicker, the likelihood is it actually won't, and you'll spend a huge amount of money because they're not cheap and they are incredibly fiddly to set up. And then you'll end up with actually maybe a car that runs a little bit worse. And then this is I see this all the time. There's a perpetuation of bloody Minis or some version of that. And yes, I've worked on them for so long, and you have as well. That this is something I even still slip into today, is this eventually getting caught up in the snake oil of this is what we need to do. This is where we need to go. I'll give you a good example of that. My race car here behind me, and we talked a little bit about on one of my recent videos, I talked a bit about the fact that there was a problem with the conrods I had in the engine, and I bought a set of these sort of readily available on, I'm going to call it eBay, conrods from questionable sources, to prove to myself whether they were good, bad, or indifferent, or whatever it was, so that I could dispel that snake oil myth. And I had a conversation with a local tuner to me, another guy who seen the video, and he rang me and said, I'm really glad you did this, because this is a question that's going through my head as well. And the two of us had a nearly 2-hour conversation. And at the end of this 2-hour conversation, of all the backs and forward, what we actually realized was neither of us in all the engines we'd ever built had broke a standard conrod. We'd never done it.
Was it all just things that you had read over the years compounding?
That's what it was. And it got in on both of us, to the point where we started to think that the only way you could go was to fit this. And when we boiled it back down again, we realized that it wasn't. We weren't necessarily wrong for looking for an alternative, because the Mini conrod itself is a heavy rod, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole yet. But this is the same thing with performance modification. Like, will twin SUs give more air? Yes, they absolutely will. But does your engine actually need it? And I think when we talk about performance modifications, that's what we need to actually be able to deduce from what we're talking about.
I totally agree with that. And like the concept of twin SUs in general is like you see these. I mean, they're super cool looking. I mean, I think in the live stream, Drew mentioned that, that twin SUs are really, really cool, and you aren't wrong. You open up an engine and you see those multiple carburetors in line, running the engine. Well, it's got a cool factor to it, but you do have to assess whether or not, one, that's going to provide benefit for your car, and two, is it going to provide benefit for you over the long period of time when you have to keep them synchronized and make sure the fueling's working well in both of them, and the flow and the oil and the float levels, all those different things. It's not impossible, and lots of people do it on their cars, and have for years. But you get this benefit of you look at a single carb, a single very large carb, that could provide you the same benefits, or close to the same benefits, with considerably less heartburn and headache. I just want to take a minute. James Barney, thanks so much for the donation. Really appreciate it. He says, love this collab and your new garage. Thanks for all the great content. Appreciate it, James.
Thank you so much, James. I really do appreciate that. And absolutely. His new garage is killer. I'm jealous of that floor. It looks, I can even just see it glinting in the background. But anyway.
Oh yeah, I'm walking around barefoot on it right now because it's I keep it clean right now.
I walk around barefoot on my garage floor from time to time as well, and then promptly visit the hospital.
Why are my feet filled with little metal shavings?
Exactly. Yeah. It's, if I feel like I just haven't had a hard enough day, I just need to add to the
pain. Be extra miserable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who needs to just work on minis without actually adding a bit of misery to the whole thing?
This is actually kind of where I wanted to ask you a question, and Mark's Mini Garage just brought this question up as well. And from your opinion, if you had a 1293 or a 1275, stock 1275, would you go the dual larger carb route, or would you go to a single large HIF 44, HIF 38, something like that?
That's a very interesting question, and I actually have some pretty solid data on it. About probably 3 years ago now, well, it's actually more, it's probably more like 5 years ago, when the SW5 camshaft from SwiftTune had been on the market a while, but was still something that was, I suppose, quite popularly being talked about. And I had a customer who asked me to build an engine with this. It was a 1293 engine with a reasonably nice, I think we put a cylinder head from MED on it, and it was reasonably good. But right when we built it, he couldn't afford the twin SUs that he wanted. And I put it to you that way, that he wanted. I didn't actually tell him that they were the carbs to get. In fact, he convinced me he wanted to put them on it because even if it made no performance difference, he said he wanted it to, he wanted the look factor, which is what you said. And that made perfect sense to me too, because, minis are not necessarily only about their performance. Some of the way they perform is how they sound and how they look when you open the bonnet. So that was fine. Anyway,
it's a big factor.
I certainly required him to get a rolling road when we built the engine first, and we got the engine rolling roaded, and it made a very reasonable power figure. I think it was, in the mid 80s, somewhere around that, both in horsepower and torque. There was very little to choose in the mid 80s somewhere, and we were both very happy with it. Reasonably mild state of tune, but happy with that. And the car drove very well. It was on a HIF 44 at that moment in time. He then, about 6 to 9 months later, purchased a brand new set of 1.5-inch SUs, HS4s. We fitted them to the car. We brought it back to the rolling road, and there was literally no difference whatsoever in horsepower. It made the exact same horsepower number, maybe one less or one more, but there was nothing in it. But it actually lost torque. It lost about 4 to 5 foot-pounds of torque on those SUs. And no matter what we did, we changed the ignition, we had it fueling in any way that it wanted to be. It wasn't rich or wasn't lean. It was absolutely happy fueling wise, but it lost torque. And from what I can understand, or what I took out from that, was that basically the inlet manifold for 1.5-inch SUs is shorter than the inlet for a HIF 44. And the way it will atomize the fuel will also be different, because in a HIF 44, you have a flow of air through the carburetor that is from all 4 pistons. In a single HS 4 split across both sides, you have half the outflow across that same carburetor. So fuel atomization is going to be different. So a bit of solid enough data. So in my opinion, honestly, if it wasn't for look and you asked me which carburetor would I fit, I'd fit a HIF 44 if that was the way to go. And they seem to be really good up to around 105, 110 horsepower and about the same in torque. And they really don't seem to ever struggle for air. And even beyond that, they can be tweaked as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you remove so much complexity from it, and it's really interesting the bit about torque, because a lot of what I've read over the years has had an alternative perspective to that, which is that dual carbs by nature will increase your torque low down, but you lose that horsepower up at the top range. And it's interesting that you had basically the opposite experience with that. It's really, really enlightening.
So generally speaking, what will affect torque will be gas speed. How much gas speed you can get through your cylinder head. If your inlet is restricting gas speed, well, let's just say the carburetor is restricting gas speed, then very definitely you will see a drop in torque. And I think a lot of what you probably have heard, or that perspective of going to twin SUs will give you a lot more low down torque, I think will be to that exact end. It'll be to the fact that the motor was struggling for gas speed early doors. SUs are very unusual because of the fact that they have to rise their pistons in order to let air move through the carburetor. And very definitely, a set of twin 1.5-inch SUs will rise their floats, their pistons quicker than a single carburetor will very early doors.
Yeah.
But what the whole thing is people sometimes misinterpret torque curves. They'll see this spike early on and think of that as being a spike that's a good thing. Oh yeah, we got this big jump early doors, and then it was nice and solid across the range. What you actually are really interested in is that spike in torque anywhere near your power band, where you will be in your rev range all the time. So like I always say to people when they ask me, what camshaft should I choose, Paul, for my engine? You tell me where you are in your rev range. If you tell me you spend all your time between 5,000 and 8,000 RPM, then a big lumpy cam is for you. If you tell me you spend 99% of your time from closed throttle to 3,000 RPM, then stay a million miles away, because of your gas speed and where you're going to get your torque to happen.
Yeah, and that for just a bit of clarification for U.S. viewers who refer to fuel as gas, what we're referring to, or what Paul's referring to there, is the speed of the air that is in gas form through the chambers of the carburetor and then through the inlet manifold and into the car, and the that piece about rev range is so important. It's something that I had to really, really reconcile with the build that I'm doing right now, because I'm on highways or motorways a lot of time here in the U.S. because we got big roads and we got big distances between places, and so I'm actually usually not very high in my rev range if I with my taller final drive, but most of my other time is spent in city roads where I'm accelerating up to shifting point, and then moving through the gears relatively quickly, as opposed to someone who might be hitting a racetrack. And so, I've got a cam that supports that, and I've got the gearing that supports that. And you don't necessarily need to know exactly the RPM range, but you maybe just think through where are you driving the most? Where do you enjoy driving the most? Might even be a better question, and then focus your performance modifications on that piece.
Yeah.
And so Turbo Phil actually says velocity is king. It's the same for cylinder heads. Big ports don't always equal big power, which is probably counterintuitive for a lot of folks.
I completely agree. And I have a feeling that it's that velocity that Phil is talking about is exactly why some of the stuff you've seen may well have said that. And I'm pretty sure that's why we've seen more torque in the HIF, because it was able to produce a higher velocity of gas, owing to the fact that it has a longer inlet tract overall than the HS has had. And it just matched nicer with everything that was in front of it. and I really do, I really do think that. I'm going to answer just one quick question that came in there from Classic Mini Garage. They were asking about twin Weber 45s versus a single Weber 45, and I know Ballylough Classic also has asked about Webers. So Weber as a performance modification, first of all, to a Mini, is again all going to be about whether you can get good gas speed. Now, one of the things a Weber has that is very much misunderstood by a lot of people is it has the ability to change the diameter of the chokes inside it, and they affect gas speed over the jet.
Yep.
If you can change the dimension inside a carburetor's, which you can't do in a Mini or in an SU, because it's continually varying. Basically, it varies according to gas velocity. If you can change that, you would certainly be able to fine tune a Weber to work maybe better with the specific setup you have. But as to whether a Weber will outperform an SU, it really is much of a muchness. For me, I think the single thing that affects a Weber so much is the person that's going to tune it for you and their ability to tune that carburetor. An SU is so much more forgiving. An SU will pretty much manage itself very, very well. If you get even very close with the needle, it will be drivable and it will manage itself quite well. If you can't figure a Weber out, you can turn a lovely engine into a dog very quickly with one. And in fact, even destroy it, because you'll overfuel it. You'll wash your liners, you start blowing smoke.
Like the whole choke concept too, for those of you who are less familiar with Webers in general, the way your Weber works, I wish I had one here to show you guys, but you have two throats of your carburetor, and inside those throats you have what Paul was talking about, which is the choke, and it's kind of a smoothed over cylindrical piece that slides into the Weber right in front of the Venturi, which is what has air flowing over it and pulls the fuel through the Weber's intricate channel system into those throats of the carburetor. But reducing, your Weber DCOE 40 is 40 millimeters, and you can reduce that down to 38, 36 millimeters with a choke, but you keep that opening consistent no matter what you are doing with your throttle. Your throttle is the only thing that is changing the size, effectively changing the size of that throat. And I think there was some questions about the split Webers, and the benefits of those. And please, I'm not a Weber expert, so absolutely step in if I say anything wrong here. But conceptually, the benefit of those is that instead of having a single Weber where you have two throats and they get split apart, each of those is fueling two cylinders. You have your inlet manifold kind of bending out to the side and going into the engine. Your dual Webers, but only using one throat on each of the Webers, allows you to have an almost perfectly straight shot into your two inlet ports, which then will split your fuel into the two cylinders more effectively. And so yeah, there are so many different factors with a Weber, but there's trade-offs and benefits to each of these things. And I think I totally agree. If you want something that's going to be more reliable or easier to work with, if you are not as familiar with carburetors, the SU carb is definitely the route to go.
Absolutely. To sort of just finish on that Weber thing, as to whether split Webers will outperform a single Weber or not, having run literally both of these on my racers over the years, I've always made comparable horsepower between the two of them. The reason I, for example, run the split Webers I do on the car that I have at the moment is in period. That is what that car was running. And the reason they did it then was quite simply because they couldn't modify the body of the car to move the Weber back away from the engine to make that shot, as you say, Cole, straight. So what ended up happening was, because the body of the car was so restrictive, they had to have a really sharp bend in the inlet manifold to get it into the head.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the option to modify your bulkhead to move your Weber back, then a single Weber will perform absolutely as well as a set of split Webers. However, if you want to operate inside the boundaries of the original bulkhead, then there is some benefits on very high performing A-series engines to splitting Webers. Whether the cost balances the performance gain, that is going to be completely up to your wallet, I'm afraid. That is going to be it. You may only see a very small number of horsepower. If what you're interested in is getting every single last horsepower out, and you're at that level, then yeah, you will see an increase in power. But as far as cost versus performance increase, if it was for a car that I was going to drive down to the shops or whatever I was going to do, then no blooming way. I would just put a single Weber, and to be honest with you, I wouldn't even put a Weber on. I'd put a set of SUs on. That's what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's with all of the experience and hindsight I have. I personally find that Webers in minis are only any good for a very high performance engine. That really is it. Yeah. One that has a significant amount of modification that it requires it. Otherwise, drivability in a road going mini is always, without a shadow of a doubt, better on SUs.
Yep. And on the topic of the expense for a Weber, some folks might be wondering why it's so much more expensive to tune the Weber, and it's a slew of reasons. One, that getting a genuine Weber alone, the body, and one that's in kind of like workable condition, it already has a pretty high price point. But where with the SU carburetors, you have a single needle, as Paul said, that tapers off, that changes the fueling by just simply lifting up and going back down. The Webers use a series of different jets to accomplish the same task. So you have jets for idle, you have jets for your mid-range, or you have jets connected to jets so that you can control the mid-range up to the high range and how much fuel is being delivered during that period of time of throttle opening. And then you even have something called pump jets, which are actually really wonderful. They fire fuel into your engine to kind of help with that initial start off the line, which unfortunately SU carburetors don't have. That is one thing that's kind of a con for SU carbs. But yeah, so all those little jets and all those little parts, not expensive individually, compounded together to tune an engine, become expensive.
So. Most definitely. Yeah, most definitely. There's an interesting side chat going on here. I don't know if you noticed this, Cole. They're talking about a spring bias for their gear change. And funny, it is a performance modification, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oftentimes when people talk about making their mini perform better, it's power tuning, isn't it? But it's funny how actually the feel of how your mini drives can actually make it feel like it's performing better. I just recently did a gearbox build for another customer. I built them a straight cut gearbox, and we changed no physical aspect of the engine, literally none. And he was convinced, told me, I know you've done something to the engine. It's definitely faster. What did you do? Why did you not tell me? And I just thought it was interesting.
That's really funny. Yeah, and that's something that we haven't talked about, and maybe we'll take the last little segment of the first part of the show here to talk about it. Gearbox and gearing modifications. There's it's not gearboxes for the minis are actually quite, relatively speaking, quite simple, and getting some additional fun out of them, or maybe making them a little bit more livable, is not something that's super difficult. And the sprung the sprung bias shifter, there's these little adapters that go on your shift. If you have a rod change gearbox, your shifter, that help kind of bias the shifter as you're going through the gears to kind of assist you in moving through the gears more quickly. And the remote change gearboxes aren't quite as easy to modify to get that done. There are some internal things you can do to kind of fiddle with and try to bias your shifter. Although remote gearboxes do kind of just generally feel a little bit more solid in terms of their shifting feel because there's less movable parts. There are the topic of final drive gears, and how that can really change the driving characteristics of your car. And I'm going to answer my question real quick, and that is, what is your favorite final drive? In general, I know it's all kind of different per engine, but for me and my driving style, I used to run a 2.95, which is quite tall. I run a 3.1 now, and I'm very, very happy with that 3.1. It's kind of like a middle of the road final drive, and it lets you get that feeling of quickness off the line, but it doesn't deafen you when you're at higher speeds. Kind of allows you to reach higher speeds without as much RPM screamage. And I'm curious, what your final drive gear of choice would be, Mr. Paul.
Very interesting. I've been on this chase for a while over the last few years, with customers' road cars, and trying to find what my recommendation is. If the engine has enough torque to pull a sort of 3.1 or a 3.2, I would completely agree with you. I think it is one of the most sort of all-round final drives that really suits a Mini, but amazingly only on 10-inch wheels. If you put that same Mini on 12 or 13-inch wheels, it becomes a complete dog. Now, amazingly, the rolling radius is not hugely different on a set of 12s, and it is only slightly different on a set of 13s, but it's enough to make it just that bit unlivable. So
that's a really, really good point, actually. I completely neglected that piece of it.
Yeah,
I've always been on 10s.
Yeah, you've always been on 10s, exactly. Yeah, I find 344 on the bigger wheels is a really lovely road final drive, and it's also, if someone came to me and said, I want a B-road burner, all I'm going to be is on the back roads, up in the hills, screaming through the mountains, and I'll do 1 or 2 blasts a year down the motorway to get to a show, where I'll put my earplugs in and just deal with it, I'd say then 344 all day long.
Yeah.
But if they said to me, look, I'm moving to the States in the morning, and you've got that much more motorway world, or even Europe, to be honest with you, on the continent, it'll be the same. For me, my mode of thinking is shaped a lot around the fact that I live on a small island, and for us, it's easy to sort of to just take those little back roads rather than the motorway. But you head down to France and suddenly that becomes much more difficult to do. So yeah, I think I'd be with you. I think a 3.1 nearly all the time for a very much road going car is a great final drive.
And that's the piece too, is the 1275 versus the 998. Maybe you don't necessarily want a taller final drive in a 998, because then you're just fighting that gear to get off the line, and then it's just miserable driving the car. So
another very interesting topic that I think we'll discuss this down the road, and I think we might actually devote a section to it, is original gear kits and their different characteristics, because not a lot of people, I think, actually realize how many different gear ratios there is in the standard Mini off the production line. It's massive. Like, it's a minefield. You could come to me with one gearbox which has a relatively standard part number on the front of it, and tell me, oh, it's a flyer with a 3.1, and then another person will come and say, oh my God, like the car just falls asunder when I go between second and third gear. I don't know what's wrong. I just can't get it going. And it'll be the gear kit. It'll be how the gears are arranged in the gear kit. If you look back to the old 1275 Clubman GT, it has that massively beautiful road burner gear kit that just everything is close, it's snicky, it's nice. But if you bought yourself a Mini City E, I don't think they even made those. I don't know if they ever got to America, but the Mini City E, which was real popular here, had a big, tall 3-1 final drive, and it had a gap between between third and fourth gear that was, I don't know, several car lengths bigger than it should have been, But
I mean, those hugely impact the way that you're driving. You're expecting the engine to progressively go through these gears, and if you have this big gap and in this gearing, you're going from I guess at the smallest one, you've got your largest gear. I always get this mixed up. And you go from a gear that's this big down to a gear that's half that size, or it's just a huge gap in between. You lose the power that is in between those two gears, and so you might hear people refer to more desirable gear kits as something called close ratio gear kits, and that's what the Clubman GT's gears were like. And Mini Spares actually sells a new heavy-duty helical gear set called the Evo helical gears. It's what I have in this, and it's a very nice, strong gear set, but it's also it's close ratio, and so you are not losing very much power at all in between your gear shifts as long as you do them relatively quickly, and you get this beautiful power band across it as you're driving the car, which so wonderful.
Yeah, and it's just that lovely feeling that you can keep that engine on the boil all the time. You don't lose that. There's nothing worse than if you're on a spirited drive and you change gear and then all of a sudden you lose all that sensation of bluster coming from the little motor. And, this is something that a lot of people don't realize about A-Series engines is they are very small capacity, which means they are very low torque producers. And to get down the road, no matter whether it's a 998 or like we as Mini enthusiasts have this notion that a 998 versus a 1275 is like, going between a 2-liter Honda and one of your big American 5 liters V8, and people here in Europe can never understand, this 5-liter V8 and it makes 200 horsepower. What's going on? But have a look at its torque figures. It'll
then all of a sudden your seat.
Yeah, you'll realize, hang on, it isn't making all that much horsepower, but it actually makes 3 shed loads of torque every time. You put that foot down, and that will completely change the way a car feels to drive. And I think if for me to round out this notion of power tuning an A-Series engine, I can't emphasize strong enough that what people think they want is horsepower, and what they expect to feel is torque. That to me is where I think so many people have spent huge amounts of money and ended up very disappointed because they have built an engine that makes horsepower and they wanted an engine that produced torque.
Yep, completely agree with that. I genuinely could not agree anymore with that. Torque is where it's at for a Mini, like hands down.
If you can make torque.
If you can make torque, yep. And even those little bits of torque changes, 5, 10, 15 foot-pounds of torque will make a huge difference in the Mini because it has such low torque from the beginning.
Okay. I suppose I want to throw this question to you because I think you're about to be. You've already been deep in this, and you're about to go even 1 foot deeper again, and that is that forced induction is something that car manufacturers the world over have been playing with, and I would like to say have perfected now. I think it's safest to say forced induction is perfected now, and it is synonymous with pretty much every modern internal combustion motor car. There is just so few non-forced induction internal combustion motor cars on the road now being produced today. So What is it? Why are people just? Why is this the magic sauce? What is it?
Well, so it actually kind of goes back to what Turbo Phil said kind of earlier in the chat, and that's velocity is king. And you are maximizing that velocity with additional force. I mean, kind of at its simplest form, you are forcing more air and ideally, if you want your car not to blow up, more fuel with it. And so there's these kind of two schools of thought in terms of forced induction, and then you've got this idea of a supercharger, and then you've got this idea of a turbocharger. And there's some overlap in some of these. There are superchargers that are similar to turbochargers, and there are turbochargers that have some similar characteristics to a supercharger. But I'm just going to kind of just touch on the topic, the main things about them. So for those of you who have been with the channel for a little while, you know that I started off my build as a supercharged build, ultimately reaching a point where I switched to a turbocharger. There is a video about that if you want to kind of hear all the details about it. But I've got one of those superchargers, and then I've got a turbocharger off here to the side, and I've taken it apart. So this is the inside of a supercharger. This right here is the casing. So these corkscrews, as they're called, go inside this unit, and they are driven by a belt. So in this case, I've got this really wonderfully nice alloy pulley that goes on the side here, and as your engine spins, it spins these corkscrews, and these compress air. And in the case of the VMAX kit, the fuel as well gets shoved all inside these corkscrews and down into your engine. And so as a result of that, with superchargers, you get a benefit of a lot of the power and torque that you are compounding in the car lower down in your RPM range, because you are getting that immediate spin of these corkscrews. And then it starts to taper off towards the top. You lose out on the benefit of this corkscrew method, as you can see them spinning there. You lose that benefit throughout the higher RPM range, as what ends up happening is your supercharger starts to draw and take away the force that the engine is getting driven by the piston. So as that spinning's happening, this is taking away the ability for the engine to spin as fast as it wants to. And so supercharger, that's kind of realm number one. These are often put on muscle cars for the same reason we talked about, where you get that power and torque low down. Now, when we jump over to a turbocharger, you get a different experience often, depending on the type of turbo that you have. But basically what's happening here is you have exhaust being channeled into a smaller impeller here that spins based on just gas flow over it. So that's velocity again playing to this. And then it's spinning a turbine right inside here and firing forced air through this pipe here and into your engine. And so as a result of all of that happening, it takes a minute to get enough exhaust gas to spin a turbo up, but you get more power and torque at a slightly higher RPM range, and that's called turbo lag. And so you get these kind of two different benefits between these two topics, but these are really great solutions for a Mini. You see these on lots of small displacement cars where you get a ton of additional power because you're basically forcing more air than would be kind of normally sucked in by the engine and accomplishing, more power output, more torque output. So it's kind of a top level look at a turbocharger and a supercharger. If you want to add anything there.
So I suppose one of the myths to dispel, I think, about forced induction is there is a lot of terminology bandied around, and boost pressure, I think, is one of those. And I think is a confusion out there that you're increasing the compression of the engine somehow by using this boost pressure, and that is giving you more power. The truth is that is not what we're trying to achieve at all. If that was the case, you would just simply keep skimming the cylinder head and getting more compression, and you'd get the power. What you're actually achieving is exactly what you said. you're increasing the velocity of air and fuel that is moving through the induction tract. In the case of the supercharger, you're getting that by robbing a little power from the engine to force the air in. In the case of a turbocharger, you harness already spent energy in the exhaust to pump that energy back in again and get a bit more bang for your same buck, I think. Exactly. And that, as I said, I suppose is a very broad overview, but it's about creating more induction velocity, and more induction velocity is the absolute king to power. And I suppose, whether it's forced induction, whether it's cylinder head modification, the lowly old stage 1 kit, or any other type of modification, every single thing that we are going to try and do to our engine to produce more power is about getting more fuel and air into the combustion chamber. I think forced induction is probably the most, to be very careful about my wording here, I was going to say straightforward, but that is definitely not the case.
No.
I think it's probably the most physical way of doing it. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you've got a good valve to port ratio, whether you've got a really free-flowing carburetor, whether you've got a really nice inlet manifold. You're just going to jam more air in there. And yes, absolutely, if you've a better cylinder head and a better inlet and a better carburetor, then you are going to get more power from that same amount of pressure. But forced induction, as a rule, just kind of overwrites everything else that is being done for tuning. And believe it or believe it not, actually promotes reliability in engines that naturally would suffer unreliability from power tuning, which, believe it or not, is the lowly Mini. Because if you don't have the avenue of forced induction, the only other avenue you have for power is to basically rev the engine more. And that is going to be the heel of that hunt. If you want to get power out of a normally aspirated engine, RPM is king. A forced induction engine becomes almost independent of RPM, which for something like a 3-bearing crank A-series engine, if it's done right and you actually spend the time to develop the system that you're going to use properly, 9 out of 10 times you will always make a more reliable, more powerful engine the forced induction route. But it is not simple.
It is not. That's for sure. That is very well said. I think that you can kind of you can even get away with, for some of these setups, bolting on or kind of just doing the bare minimum with a supercharger or turbocharger and still get, benefits out of it. Whether it's going to be reliable long term and things like that are a whole different scenario. But there are so many more things that you need to think about with these turbo and supercharged cars, like fuel pressure, fuel delivery, the carburetor that you're using. If you're going to use a carburetor, you could also go, fuel injected with boosted setups, which arguably is a really great route to take. And I would say that fuel injection would even be a really great route to take with naturally aspirated engines too. You get a completely different set of problems, but they're solvable. So yeah, I think with that, I've kind of, what do you think, Paul? I think it's time to open up for Q&A and
I'm just going to pick up Turbo Phil was on there again, and he made a very good point. And thank you for chiming in, because it is actually a very good point to make. And in my feverish excitement, sometimes I miss these or misrepresent them. So thank you very much, Phil. He's absolutely correct. A turbo or a supercharger does not increase velocity, which I suppose we talked about at the start. It increases the density. Now, the reason why I suppose people can get confused, even myself, with the notion of velocity versus air density, in a normally aspirated engine, air density is a result of increased air density is a result of high velocity. In other words, you can get a bigger, more compact charge in there as a result of higher gas speed. A supercharger, rather than increasing the gas speed, the velocity actually just puts more of it in the same space. So it's increasing, and that's what that pressure we see is.
That density, increasing
PSI
that. Is. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons
it's for that reason a supercharger runs into trouble. Because it heats the air so much, because it's so mechanical in its method of compressing it, that it introduces so much heat into that air that obviously for every given degree in temperature increase, you lose gas density. So you end up running into this situation that the harder you spin that charger, the more you're going to heat the air. The more you heat the air, well, the less power you're going to get as a result. So you'll reach a ceiling.
Really glad that you brought that up.
Supercharged, I think, for getting bags and bags of torque down low, I don't think there's anything to beat one of them. But supercharging a Mini properly, it's a different story.
Yes, that's a whole other avenue, which I don't know that we have even remotely enough time to get into today.
Not tonight, I don't think. Good one. Yeah, I think if there's an appetite, out there for more in-depth technical thought on stuff like this, get in the comments, guys. Get out there and let us know, because if there is an appetite, I'm happy to go as deep as anybody likes, and I'll go off and I'll do the research, as I'm sure will Cole, and we will come back to you. And if you want us to do even a series of videos on forced induction, then I'm all about it. I'm here to help people learn and to learn myself. And
absolutely,
I am wearing my turbocharged t-shirt today for that very reason.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Lewis.
Yes. Thank you, Lewis.
Perfect. Well,
so will we Q&A this up?
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't been part of one of these Q&A sessions yet, we do a full Q&A session at the end of these live streams, where we're going to be taking your questions. And I popped a little thing on the screen here. All of the super chats, we will get to every single one of those chats. So if you donate to the channel, thank you so much. Helps us a lot. And we will be answering your question, but we are also going to be going through the other questions as well. So don't worry if you don't feel like you can donate, that is totally all right as well. And we're going to do our best to answer all the questions we can.
Well, we'll start there with Mary T. Thank you very much for the super chat.
Thank you, Mary.
That is very much appreciated. More power, a 970S or a 1071? Well, for anybody who doesn't know, these were the early Cooper S variants, I suppose would be the best way to describe it. So in the early days of Minis in the 60s, the producers played around with a couple of different engine capacities. 1275, 970, and 1071 were the kind of three very much synonymous Cooper S engine sizes. And basically, the big difference in all of these was pretty much stroke, and that is how far the piston moved in the bore, as opposed to the size of its pistons. And generally speaking, why they were playing with this, and this is actually a really good question for what we're talking about, is they were playing with air velocity in the very early days. So what they were trying to do was they were trying to see what the best combination of stroke, how far the piston moves, versus the diameter of the piston would be to gas speed and power, effectively. That was the idea. Yep. So like any good car manufacturer, they used their Patreons to test their theories. So they produced engines and put them out to the public and seen what people liked. Which would make more power? I don't know that there was a huge difference between the 1070 and the 970, but I can tell you what you will find is that the power will have been in a completely different place. So the power will have been in a different spot in the RPM range between the two of them. So I suppose the big thing will be drivability. And I would hazard a guess. I've only ever driven a 1071, a 1070. I've never driven a 970, so I can't tell you. But very definitely, the power was high up the rev range in the 1071s. So I suppose the 970 could have only been worse. So I imagine the winner probably would beat the Cooper S1071, but they ultimately built the 1275 to beat the two of them. So and it was so good that it remained in production for 50 years, something like that.
Yeah, for a long time. And both of those engines too were built off of, a lot of people don't know this, or maybe they do, I don't know. The both of those engines and like the 1100s that were out, 998s, those are actually using the same, generally speaking, the same block casting size. So they were both built off of a 998 platform. And then obviously before these, there was the 850, which was, the first Mini, which was, it was a special time and it was a sweet car, but it was not a quick car.
No. 848cc, I owned one myself, and I can tell you what, it was not a quick car. A very good friend of mine owned one, and he still raves to this day that he changed gear at valve bounce. And I can remember thinking to myself, Jesus. But having driven a couple of 848cc minis in my time, valve bounce comes quite early. So he wasn't as crazy as you might have thought.
Philip has a good question. So it looks like he asked before, what was a good final drive for all around on 13-inch wheels? I think that was, we kind of both decided on the 3.44 would have been our recommendation for that size wheel. Depending on your gear set, that was something.
Those messages do kind of fly by, and it can be a little bit easy when you're in the heat of battle to miss it. So my apologies if we did miss that. I completely agree with you, Cole. The 13-inch wheels for a road burner, I would definitely say 344. If you've got a lot of motorway mileage to do and you've got a big capacity A series, so 1275 plus, you could get away with the 3.2. But don't expect it to have loads of low-end grunt. It won't have.
Yep.
Absolutely. It'll take winding up.
Yeah. One of the other folks here in the U.S., Lone Star Mini, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to talk to him. Randy, he is a incredibly nice guy. He's got a channel as well, and he has a question about the. Being new to engines, I have the Evo gear set and a 3.1 ratio. It has been recommended for me to use the AC Dodds RS cam. How will this affect my performance? I've not personally used the AC Dodds RS cam, but I do have the 3.1s with the Evo gear set in this car, and it's been a really, really great combination for me. And that was using initially basically an SW5 cam, or rather, it was effectively an SW5 cam, but more recently that has changed, so I don't have a new recommendation on that yet.
I've used the RS myself a few times in the last couple of years, and generally speaking, it for all intensive purposes, and Mr. Dodd will probably murder me to death for likening it to another cam, but my apologies, AC, if you do listen to this. But I would liken it to the MED High Torque or the Swift Tune SW5. It is a good producer of torque, but I'd be interested to know, did Lone Star mention what size capacity engine he's putting it in? I might have missed that.
Oh, I believe it's a 1275. I don't remember what he told me the other day.
If it's a 12.75, I think that is a very good combination, to be honest with you. Any of those three cams will work really well in that combination. And also mini spares do a sort of a road rally high torque cam as well. 1330, thanks, Randy. Yeah, I absolutely I think you would find that it'll be good. And like you said, I think that final drive and that gear kit is a very good combo.
Yep. What I will do is after our live stream, I have a tool that I use that allows me to calculate your speed, your RPMs, all based on your wheel size, your gear ratios at each individual gear, and your final drive. And it was immensely helpful for me when I was building out this engine. Steve Blakemore, Turbo Cooper Sport, recommended it to me. And it gave me a perfect picture of, okay, at 75 miles per hour on the highway, what is going to be my speed? What's going to be my RPM? And that allowed me to kind of determine whether or not I would have my ears bleeding on the highway. But I think it's valuable for other ranges.
I'm going to just there was a chap on earlier on who I can't see his comment now, but he was asking about gearbox parts and the wonderful John Guess. Anybody who knows John Guess from Guessworks Motors in the UK, he is a great source of those kind of weird and wonderful, very unusual stuff from those gear kits. He's taken apart more gearboxes, I think, than I've actually ever seen, let alone taken apart. So that is a good option. So I give John a shout out. He is a good guy for that sort of stuff. It was Peter Godsmith. Billy just popped in there to tell me. So yeah, Peter, if you're still watching, that's the guy that would have those bits. Do you have that calculator on your website? I
have plans to put it on the website. There's a lot of math behind it, and so it's actually in the works.
I'm just going to twist the screw there. So it's going to be there soon. We're going to have access to this soon. Yeah, all right. Go on. There's a knife in your side. I'll give it a twist on the next live stream.
Yeah, I'll just get to that right now, Paul. Damn.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, like Jesus, when you're done sweeping your beautiful new garage floor, maybe you could you could do your math or whatever it is.
That's great. So one from Lewis, as a thank you for making these wonderful shirts and posters that you see behind me too. He is asking rocker ratios 1.3, 1.5. When would you recommend what? And in my case, with an SW10 cam. So
okay, go. You give us your rocker ratio. I know you've been playing with them a good bit recently.
Yeah, and I will say I'll put a caveat out there that my knowledge base around this is definitely more tailored towards boosted engines. And so I'll give that perspective, and then maybe you want to give the NA perspective.
Yeah, totally.
1.3s, 1.5s. 1.3 is the standard ratio, and later cars used a different style rocker that actually had a little under 1.3, if I remember correctly. It's like 1.293 or something like that. Otherwise, is 1.3. And for a boosted engine in general, sticking with a standard ratio is probably going to be better. When you have that forced induction, this is something that I've learned and read about relatively recently, is that increasing that valve duration and specifically the valve overlap, it can be very detrimental to a boosted engine. And so that's something that you really want to try and reduce and mimic and prevent. So a standard ratio roller rocker is 1.3. Even just an upgraded version from MED, Minisport, Minispares, 7 Mini Parts, all of these different parts companies offer a standard ratio one, would be stellar. But once you start getting into NA engines and something that where you want even a little bit more of control over that valving, or you might get more benefit out of that, you might want to move into those other roller rockers or greater ratio rockers, which I'm going to hand that off to you, Paul.
Okay. Yeah, I completely concur with you. My knowledge of the boosted side of things is probably a little bit out of date. So I'm going to bow to your superior knowledge there. But everything that you said made perfect sense to me. It makes perfect sense to me. Regarding normally aspirated engines, be it a 998 or a 1275 variant, there's two things to think about with rockers. A rocker is just simply a means of transferring motion from the push rod, which is transferring motion from the action of the lifter of the cam. So if you have a camshaft, it's got a lobe, which its job is
camshaft you just have right there.
Oh, it just
laying around.
Just happens to be sitting here. So the lobe of a camshaft is effectively a bump, and as the engine rotates, it lifts the follower, which is a lump of steel inside the engine that runs on this, and that motion is transmitted up through the push rod, and the rocker arm, its job is to take that motion and give it to the valve, and it gives the valve an opening motion. Okay. A rocker will always have a ratio. In other words, it's going to increase or show a greater amount of movement than the cam can produce. That will always be the case with a Mini. Changing the different ratios between, let's just say, a 1-to-1, if that existed, would mean that the valve would open exactly the same amount as the height of the lobe of the cam. So in other words, if the lobe of the cam had, let's just say, a height of 8 millimeters from the center to the top, then it would open the valve 8 millimeters with a 1 ratio. As you start changing the ratios of your rockers, say 1.3, 1.5, even as far as 1.7, you then are multiplying that factor, which means you're opening your valve to a greater degree. The payoff to this is wear in the valve train. So obviously, if you have a lever, anyone who's knows their law of the lever, you get nothing for nothing in the law of the lever. There is always a payoff. So if you get more movement, there's a corresponding increase in force, which is on your valve train. A place where this was always hugely apparent was in the old John Cooper Works later 90s Minis, where they took the standard Mini, brought it into the John Cooper garages, and put 1.5 roller rockers on them and a gas flowed cylinder head, blah, 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 blah. And invariably, any of those that are still in that original state have worn camshafts. And the reason for that is that the cams themselves and the valve train materials were not capable of withstanding that load over time. So, a long-winded answer to your question, Lewis. Would I say 1.5s versus standard 1.3s? It is all down to what you hope to get from your engine. If what you want to get from the engine is ultimate performance and reliability is not something that you're worrying about, in other words, if it's going to wear, it's going to wear, then I would say you will always get more performance from a higher ratio rocker. But it is a payoff, and that payoff will be geometry and wear in the motor. Again, we can talk about this all night. There's probably a week's worth of conversation to be had about rocker geometry and performance gains. But in the short term, hopefully that answered your question. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent.
And I think too, there's a misconception, and I think I'm going to say this, and I'm fairly sure I've got it right, but please correct me if I say this incorrectly. But the nature of increasing that ratio is you are not increasing you are increasing the amount of time the valve stays open, rather than the amount of what's the way to put this? Yeah, you're basically increasing the amount of time that valve stays open with increased ratio rockers. Is that correct? I think that's the way I understand it.
Close. Okay. You are increasing how open the valve is for the same amount of time. So the time is all down to the profile on this camshaft. So the profile here denotes how long it's open for. So the width versus the height effectively will determine how long it's open for. But how much it is open at any given time is changed by the ratio of the rocker. So if you can open that valve more earlier, then you allow more air and fuel in. So it basically gives you a more open valve for the same amount of time. That's increasing the ratio does.
Glad I said that wrong, because I'm glad you were able to correct that. That's great. I always get that kind of like mixed up, and I think that might be something common for a lot of folks, is that is a confusing concept with all of these ratios and push rods and rockers and cams and blah, 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 blah.
You're absolutely right, because minis are really unusual. Because of the way their engines work, they actually respond incredibly well to opening the valve early. So the sooner you can get that valve open, and the more it's open earlier, the more power they make, pretty much ad infinitum. But obviously you run out of the ability to do that. Like I said, there was a 1.7 roller rocker that was made by Titan many years ago. And invariably, if you fitted that to an engine, it made more power and more torque. But it was just so hard on the valve chain that they ended up becoming something that just... they might even still make them, but they're not popular for that reason, because they're incredibly hard on what is a very expensive part of your engine, and very intricate to repair and replace.
Oh, here we have a very interesting question. So I recently picked up an all-original Mark II with hydroelastic suspension. Would it be sacrilege to put dry suspension on it, or should I keep it wet? Okay, so this one I think is a very opinionated perspective, and I definitely have a very specific opinion about it. I don't think it's controversial, though. The hydroelastic suspensions, for those of you who have had an opportunity to drive one that had one that's fully working, they are really quite comfortable. They're nice, they're smooth. The liquid and the way that it's dampening the force of the road is very different from a standard spring or cone plus shock absorber setup. But they are becoming very hard to find people to maintain, and the dampers themselves are very difficult to repair, and they're frequently broken. And so from a personal perspective, or from my standpoint, I would 100% keep all of the hydroelastic parts, try to get them repaired. But if you can't, I don't think it's sacrilegious to switch to a dry suspension. I think that dry suspensions are wonderful, and they're long-term, they're certainly much more reliable.
I kind of completely agree with you. I was a huge exponent of demolishing hydroelastic suspensions in minis for years, and being like, take that crap and throw it away. It's rubbish. I fade to admit it, but it was the case. The truth is, I had a wonderful experience very recently of restoring a car with a good friend of mine, and he was absolutely adamant to restore it to original hydroelastic, and I said, okay, we'll do it. And I have to say, hand on my heart, one of the nicest suspension rides in any Mini I have ever driven, without a shadow of a doubt. Handling, very different kettle of fish. One of the things he did, and I just noticed Drew put in a comment there also saying this, he added front dampers, and I think that is probably the single best thing you can do. So if our friend Classic Mini Projects, if the reason why you want to get rid of the hydroelastic suspension is because of the way the car handles, stick with it, and there is lots of tunability for Hydrolastic. If you want to change it because of reliability and because you're finding it hard, as Cole says, to maintain or to keep that suspension working, or that is a fear that you have for the future of the project of that car, then I personally don't think it's sacrilegious. But like Cole said, I would hang on to that stuff, and I would try and get it into working order if I could, because it's something that I if I had a Hydrolastic car now, I would do everything in my power to keep it that way, because they are becoming incredibly rare. They're not something, and it will massively add to the value of your car as well. Let's just put that out there as well. If you can keep your Hydrolastic, but sacrilegious wise, I don't think so. If you can justify it like that and say, look, I can't get blooming Hydrolastic displacers, they can't be got here in the US, then that makes perfect sense. To me, anyway.
I don't even know, do people make those displacers anymore? I don't think so.
I don't. I know of 2 people that repair them.
I know of a repair shop here in the US.
Yeah, and I think they cut the old hose off, they tread the damper, and they put in modern hydraulic hose into them. And I think that is the #1 failure mode of them. I don't think the dampers themselves are very prone to failing, as in going porous or something like that. But with that said, that's over here in these climes. I'm not sure how they are handling the climate that you guys might have in the US.
I don't think we didn't have a lot of hydro cars. We didn't have a lot of minis in general in the US. There were more in Canada, in both respects. So I think most of the folks that had Hydrolastic cars that originally were mostly in a colder climate north of the wall, as I say, in Canada. So yeah, but Trevor actually mentions one bit, fitting an anti-roll bar kit in the rear is also a really great way to improve the handling on a hydro car. I actually am going to, this is not a hydro car, but in the very near future, I'm going to be doing a full video on front and rear sway bar installations from 7 Mini Parts. So stay tuned for that.
Brilliant. Yeah, if you're going to fit the rear anti-roll bar, I would very definitely strongly recommend front dampers, because the anti-roll bar without front dampers on a Hydrolastic Mini can lead to some very, very exciting corner experiences, ones that are very similar to merry-go-rounds. But with dampers, brilliant modification, and really does work very well. Yeah, I speak from experience on that one. So I looked very foolish one day crossing a junction as well. So
oh no. In Classic Mini projects, the repair shop here in the US, I will have to get that information to you. If you shoot me an email, classicminidiy@gmail.com, I'll get you the contact information for that shop. The last time I talked with them, though, was about a year or 2 ago. So hopefully they're still doing it. But if the US shop isn't, maybe Paul, you have somebody you would recommend who could help out with that?
The guy I know in the UK that does them is Mini Mail is the name of the company. Mini Mail. If you Google Mini Mail, you'll find them.
Engine.
Yeah. There's a really wonderful guy there. Steve Allen is his name. Tim Harbour runs Mini Mail. He's a wonderful guy, and I'm very good friends with Tim. But he also has Alan working there, who no doubtedly did your engine plates for you, or your chassis plates. And they are 2 top class guys, and they're very good at fixing Hydrolastic suspension cones. Well, displacers, should I say? But yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Hold displacers. Sweet. So what else you guys got for us tonight? Or this afternoon?
I know Trevor actually asked the question there earlier on, and I missed it, so I'm not sure. Hello, Trevor. He's coming down to me during the week next week for some. We're helping build a turbo engine. So I'm not sure if you
Oh
answered the
yeah, I
question or
see
not, but I
here.
didn't
What
see it.
cam do you use in your Turbo 1293? I scrolled up just a little bit, and so that if that's the question you're referring to, Trevor,
That was the
to
one, yeah.
answer that, um, in my setup, I am running the Phase 2 cam from Avon Bar. I bought that cam based on heavy recommendations from a lot of folks. I have a video on it on installing that, setting the cam timing for that and everything. So if you want to check that out, you can. But really cool independent shop that makes these camshafts, and it is a billet cam, so it's it's a really wonderful unit. I have not had a chance to use it yet, so I don't have direct experience. But everything I've heard has been just praise.
Yeah, they're a wonderful cam, an absolutely wonderful cam. And across the board, I've heard nothing but really good reports about them on boosted minis. I do genuinely think they got the recipe right for that one.
Yep. Yep. Let's see.
Oh,
We got a question here from Team Ballyloch Classics. Given the
yeah.
thinking single SU would be a better route than a Weber for a road mini for fast road 1293 like I have, would an HS4 and HIF 44 be a better option? My vote would be HIF 44 or HS6. They're basically the same carburetor, same size. Both have the floating needle in them. The only thing I will say is the HS6 has the float bowl on the side, which might make it easier to fit, depending on the body of your car. But my vote would be the HIF 44.
I would completely agree with Colleen. The HIF 44 is probably SU's single best designed carburetor ever. I think the combination of how the dash pot is moved internally with the drillings, the integrated float bowl, to me, honestly, it's one of the best performing carburetors out there for a road going mini. If you were telling me it was an all-out race or track day mini, I would probably say I would slightly lean towards the HS4. They tend to perform slightly better on very high revving, high flow engines. They tend to lift their dash pot a bit harder earlier, and they tend to perform a little bit better. But for a road going mini, as you say, a HF 44 all the day long. I think it's probably one
It's
of the
interesting
best.
about the HS4 being more performant in that way. That's counterintuitive to me, but very interesting.
Yeah, one of our Lewis, in fact, actually had a lot of trouble with a HAS 44 or HS4, excuse me, on his car for this very reason. He was struggling to get low end torque because the HS4, because of the way the drillings are in the dash pot, it lifts the piston very quickly and very hard. So you get an almost wide open throat nearly immediately in the HS4, which for very high performance A series engines is a benefit, but pretty much everywhere else it's a disadvantage, and it's a torque killer early doors.
Yep.
So that's why, yeah.
A lot of folks actually with the HIF 44s there's a spring that lives inside your dash pot, and to kind of mitigate that feeling, they'll increase the tension of that spring so it reduces how quickly it can lift.
Absolutely.
And it helps exactly what Paul's talking about there. Let's see here. I'm not familiar with this carb. Running a Weber DGV 32/36 at high elevation. And any recommendations on tuning, or should I replace it for more fun?
I have tuned a couple of minis with that DGV carburetor. It was very common here in Europe on Volkswagens, actually. It was on the early, I think it was the Golf, actually. It might have been the Polo, but the earlier small bore Volkswagens had that carburetor, or a variant of it anyway. They are an unusual beast, is what I will say. And unfortunately, a lot of the knowledge about them is very limited. And actually finding, trying to find good, solid tuning information for them is pretty rare. I think what I would be honest to say is, if you are really keen on doing your studies and trial and error, then they can be made to work very well. But honestly, for straightforward tunability and, in fairness, reliability, the SU at high altitude is very, very, very well proven, and it works very well. Very reliable.
Yeah, that's been my experience with the SUs. At least we have a lot of very tall, not the tallest in the U.S., but very tall mountain ranges here in North Carolina, and a lot of time we spend, ripping around the mountain roads up there, and the SUs, even with only a very mild change to the tuning, just eat up those mountain roads, eat up those higher elevations. We're looking at, sorry, I don't have the meter version of this, but around like 3,500 to 3,700 feet above sea level. And then, there's a pretty big shift in terms of the air density up there for sure.
Well, one of the big beauties about the SU, and I've experienced this myself, is that if you have a HS SU, and that is any of the or the H series for that matter, but HS probably have this in the best. Their mechanism of choke is actually to enrich in the fuel mixture, so they don't actually choke the inlet; they enrich in the fuel mixture. And if you're doing a lot of high elevation driving, it actually can be a really wonderful tweak. You can very slightly pull the choke out at high elevation and enrich in the mixture, and give yourself a really nice driving mini that can be put back to low elevation driving with the slip of literally just pushing in or pulling out the choke. So I'd be inclined, if I know, I'm not sure who it was, but it might well actually be some of the rally guys, somebody like Paddy Hopkirk or one of those, Altonen or somebody, who documented in his book doing exactly that, or his navigator being sort of a choke wizard. And as they were navigating the high alpine passes, there was one of the navigators was just an expert at pulling the choke out the exact right amount at the right time, that the car would have that extra power to make the pass or whatever. I will find out where that was. I can't remember. I read it in one of their books anyway. It might have been Paddy Hopkirk that talked about it. But it's lovely.
That's
lovely
super cool. And talk about being in tune with and connected to how your car is running, like truly.
Absolutely. The guys at the navigator, like while reading these pace notes at 60 miles an hour or whatever they were doing, giving it,
he's like
reaching over and giving it a little bit. Oh yeah, she's away now, and off they go. Like, it's lovely.
Oh man. Trevor actually has another question that one thing that really, really confused me, or at least gave me some heartburn around this turbo build, and it's something I want to talk about. He says it's been a nightmare getting a good dizzy for a turbo. Problem is the ignition curve needs to be changed as you increase the boost from standard. Best to use 1-2-3 distributor, Megajolt ignition system or similar. And this is something that I definitely ran into with this build. I was like, basically just fretting about it, like trying to figure out, do I get a distributor for this or do I go electronic ignition? And ultimately I did decide on an electronic ignition module. I went with the DTA fast unit from MED for a couple reasons. There are definitely routes you can take that are less expensive than that, but the kit is very comprehensive. Comes with basically everything you need in order to do this conversion. Aside from the base map and the actual mapping of your electric ignition, that's going to be something that you'll need to do. But it completely removes the distributor and the kind of heartburn around a distributor with a turbo, and allows you to control that ignition timing. It's not a fully fuel injected ECU. It lets you control that ignition timing only based on the crank position. And then you have your coil pack, which is what I'm holding right now, which can be placed essentially anywhere as long as the lead is long enough. And then your ignition leads off of that. Your ECU then lives inside the car because it is not a waterproof unit. But that would be my recommendation: is spend, if your budget allows for it, spend the extra money on the electric ignition. I think that you will have a much better end result if you do that.
I would be inclined to completely agree. While the likes of the 123 or the CSI mappable distributors certainly give a degree of tunability, for boost it's a difficult one. We could try talking to CSI and see did they do a boost sensing one, or whether they could build a boost sensing one, but what it would probably cost, you would be really close to the same money as a mapped ignition. And I'd be inclined to say that for a boosted engine, the safety factor behind mapped ignition on a computer would be, I would go for that. I think it just gives you that extra air of safety, and your rolling road tuner will love you because you'll make his life so much easier.
Yeah, at most anyone. So the nice thing about electric ignitions too is the electric ignition, a managed ignition system, is that conceptually it's not any different between a Mini and a modern car. And ignition only systems are dead simple for effectively any tuner that's out there who has a rolling road or a dyno. They anyone worth their salt able to do that will be able to help you tune an ignition only system.
Ian from Ballylock Classic just put in the comment section, it was Mike Woods was the
choke wizard.
The choke wizard, don't Google it, for the love of God.
Yeah, that might be a bad phrasing.
Do not Google that.
Oh no. I need to work on my phrasing. That's not the first time today I've done that.
He's a choke wizard. Good old Mike Woods. Yeah. It's that we see you have some excuse. It's like, what is it, like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon for you? It's night here now.
What it's almost 10 there, 10:30.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you now. Yeah, it's literally just about to go to 10 o'clock. Yeah, it's just about to be 10 o'clock. Yeah,
very nice.
And thank you, by the way, to all the wonderful people who are watching our video or our live stream. You've been floating around all the time, and I really, really do appreciate everybody who tunes in and watches us.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys, thank you so much for this. This is obviously just our second episode, but we've really been enjoying doing this with you guys. So if you guys have suggestions for topics in upcoming videos, post those in the comments in the comment feed, or after this video if you're watching it in the future. Let us know, because we'll definitely incorporate some of those into the future videos.
Absolutely. As I said, I think tuning is probably going to be a regular topic in the coming months as we go forward. I think, if anything, what I've learned from this live stream anyway is that I think the topic we can explore, hopefully, individual topics, whether it's rocker geometry or camshaft selection or timing or whatever it is. And I think there's loads of there is plenty of material there for us all to go, and I would hope as well, and it's something that I would just like to point out as well, the likes of Phil from turbominis.com, who is in the comment section. I just want to say a big thank you to anybody who has been putting input into the comment section. I think it's very important that I suppose I don't know how to say this in the right way, but myself and Cole are doing these live streams to create a community where we all can kind of get together and I suppose use the hive mind, not just to talk about topics, but to to create a new space for mini development as well. I think that is certainly what we need to do. We internet forums were a beautiful place where this type of conversation was happening 5 or 8 years ago, and that has moved on now, and people are into platforms of video. So I would love going forward if this sort of live stream and this kind of conversation could move into that area where we have these chats, and it'll only be possible if people like Phil and Lewis and Mini Performance and everybody else who has been in the live stream in Ballylough Classics, and everybody else, that hive mind, everybody given their 2 pence worth, and we're moderators, I suppose, is all we really are, and it's a platform for everybody, and that's certainly what I want it to be anyway.
Yep, and to tack onto that, it's just the key about this community, and something that I think has been lost a little bit in some of the Facebook groups and not the forums so much, because unfortunately the forums have kind of waned in popularity as Facebook and social media has become king, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective. And as a result, we get a lot of toxicity in those groups. And these live streams, we're approaching this with this concept of everybody we're assuming positive intent, and so we're assuming that all of us together are trying to make and increase our knowledge base in an effective and constructive way. Like Paul here, Paul Hickey, and then of course Turbo Phil and Rich. Everybody is contributing this information and correcting us, and it's okay to be wrong and learn these things as we're going through it too. So correct us, give us some information, correct our mistakes, and then if that back and forth is how people learn. So really want to appreciate that.
We will have also, this is interned in the bowels of YouTube now, for anybody who wants to go back over and watch forevermore effectively. And you and I had a chat about Turbo Minis, the forum that existed, and I know a couple of the guys that are in the chat here from that era where there was a forum where a lot of like-minded people got together to talk about tuning A-series engines, and it wasn't just about turbos, to be honest with you. We talked about absolutely everything. And unfortunately those forums are not as busy as they once were, as Cole said, because of Facebook and Instagram and all that sort of stuff. And I think this is the new platform. I think this is where people are coming to get this information. And you can see all the big car cultures across the board, whether it be Volkswagen, whether it be BMWs or Honda or any of those. They're all in a very similar vein. And the Mini has such a big following that it's critical we don't lose the information, because the likes of me or the likes of Phil or the likes of Cole or anybody, we could for some reason change our journey in life and veer away from Minis, and then all of that information is gone. Whereas if it's here in video format, it's there for anyone to watch and come back on, when they ultimately get into their Minis or whatever. I would imagine if there was a way that you could go back and watch videos of, the tuners from 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. Imagine Richard Longman and, all of those people all did videos like this that we could watch. I mean, it would be incredible. Fantastic. Wouldn't it just and it would be a beautiful resource to have. I'm not comparing myself, by the way, to Richard Longman, in case anybody thinks I'm getting a notion. But I'm just saying that's the thing. But we do have people of that caliber tuning in here. To say that, to have those people coming in on our lowly little live stream is fantastic. And, let's keep them going and keep them getting out there.
Definitely. Well, I think that is as good a place as any to wrap this up. Everybody, thank you so very, very much for joining in tonight. And if you, again, have any suggestions for future videos, put those in, suggest them. We will incorporate those into our upcoming episodes. We do this once a month. every month. And we will keep this going as long as we keep getting, people interested, and hopefully we can keep generating this information. And of course, regular videos on both of our channels, which you are seeing this stream on, both of them simultaneously.
Wow, yeah.
We have
Technology.
videos on other stuff as well.
Yeah,
it's the way of the future, I tell you.
Yeah, look at us. Yeah. If you told me 3 years ago, or even 2 years ago, that this would be where it is, I would have been amazed. I'd have said, I'm sure it is, but I won't be involved in it. So thank you very much again, Cole, as always, for affording me the possibility, and also to Billy in the background, who is also helping and moderating. Thank you very much again, as usual. And yes, again, 110% thank you to everybody who super chatted, and that helps us to be able to keep these live streams going. I don't want to make any talk about money because it's not important in this situation, but Cole, in fairness, has managed to organize this live stream so it's on my channel and it's on his channel, so everybody can see it and can get access to it, and a big thank you to him for that. And to you guys for tuning in.
Alrighty, guys. Well, we'll see you on the next one. And until then, you know the drill. Enjoy those minis. Motor on.
See you guys in the next one.